Oh, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with SP History, and today we finally arrive at the moment, and it's episode 8, and we're going to be looking at February 21st, 1965. This is the day Malcolm X was assassinated. From this point forward, we'll be looking at there's the beginning of a story that we're going to be looking at today that draws in the FBI. And once we get into the post-assassination investigation episodes, it's pretty much we'll have the trial, the sham trials that the government conducts, but we'll be looking very hard, very close at the FBI's role in this assassination. So this is where the conspiracy angle begins. Everything we've covered to this point is the Nation of Islam, the backstory of Malcolm X and his relationship with the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. And we've just kind of skirted the edges of anything related to the FBI. But I have uh, dropped, I think, enough information to steer you in that direction, at least get you thinking that that's where we're headed. For example, in yesterday's or episode 7, I believe it was, the FBI memo, J. Edgar Hoover admonishing his underlings to, quote, do something about Malcolm X. And it'll grow from there. So we're going to be looking at February 21st today. And of course, I've gone through all of these sources in each preceding video. So I'll just slowly scroll through these so you can kind of get an idea. And some of these you may be interested in checking out for yourself. And of course, I've had a few comments from people online recommending additional sources. I have yet to check them out, but I will. And I appreciate those heads up, those additional sources. These are the ones that I have used. And last few days, we've been talking a lot about Manning Parable's information. It's the source material I got from Manning Parable, this really good book. I've told you several times that we haven't got into Garrett Felber's information yet, but we're fixing to. He's going to be featured prominently going forward, FBI historian, and the two Hollywood movies. One's actually a TV series, the other's a documentary. All right, February 21st, 1965. Um, so you know that Malcolm X has, subsequent to his trip, I should say trips plural, but the one that was really important was the one to Mecca when he experienced a second conversion. And in that second conversion, he heals from all the anger and the bitterness in his heart and forgives the white man, no longer claims that the white man needs to be exterminated or extinguished, no longer blames the white man for all the black man's problems, and no longer claims exclusivity for the cause. In other words, he's open to working with others. In fact, he's open to working even with white people if they are honest brokers in the cause. He's reaching out to people he used to scorn, such as Martin Luther King, and he is forming coalitions with people that have gotten the attention of the American government. He's forming coalitions with Latin American dictators, socialist revolutionaries who have launched socialist revolutions. He's forming coalitions with African kings and princes and queens and leaders, maybe even dictators. He's coming out against capitalism because he believes capitalism is the root cause, racism is the symptom. And so that's where we stand. And he comes back from that last Remember that trip? And he starts a new organization called the OAAU, which is an effort to bring all these disparate organizations and entities together. That's really the purpose of it. Organization of Afro-American Unity Union. Um, Africans, wherever they may be around the world, joining with Americans, forming a unity, a brotherhood to pursue not just civil rights, which again is a symptom, but human rights. And of course, their main target in this is going to be capitalism. So, in the last episode, we saw just how effectively he had done that and raised his profile. He was no longer just a two-bit civil rights leader in American cities, working for a splintered civil rights group as the number two. He is now an international leader of human rights, of a human rights coalition. He's working with kings, leaders of states, nation states. He's working across the aisle with Martin Luther King. He's allying himself with socialist revolutionaries, socialist causes, and socialist revolutions. And so he has become a mover and a shaker on the international scene. And that we saw yesterday that the last two times he went overseas, there was an attempt on his life in Egypt, and there was a denial of entrance in Paris to the country of France, indicating that someone or something at a higher level than the Nation of Islam is now actively opposing him, trying to assassinate him, trying to deny him the freedom to travel. In other words, this international business that he's been conducting has become troublesome for somebody or something. I think that's really important to remember. And of course, you still have the problems at home, bombing of his house, attacking of his entourage in the Boston Tunnel, attacking of his car in LA. So he is not just experiencing problems here at home. He can't go anywhere around the world without being a wanted man. So we get to February 21st, 1965. Remember, this is the Audubon Ballroom. You see here the picture of it. And it has that kind of a theater look to it with the marquee entrance and stuff. It's in Harlem, and it's where Malcolm X regularly spoke, usually on Sundays. Um, Remember, this is also the site that he invited Che Guevara to come speak. And Che Guevara, after initially agreeing, later backed out, saying the security at the Audubon Ballroom was substandard. It wasn't up to snuff. And so he had been advised not to go. So there is some indication that the security is not sufficient for someone or of certainly Che Guevara's status, but also Malcolm X's status. Malcolm X has all the same enemies, plus some, that Che Guevara has. So it's as dangerous, if not more, for Malcolm X as it is Che Guevara. But he's going to go anyway. So this is where he speaks. Most of the meetings, as I said, were on Sundays. Usually about 500 to 600 people would be in attendance. And it's sort of like a boxing match. You have the undercards. So Malcolm X would be the featured speaker, but there were always invited guests who would come along and speak prior to Malcolm X. One of them, just to give you an example, was Muhammad Babu, leader of the revolution, Zanzibar. Um, these relationships that Malcolm X had cultivated on the international scene, especially in Africa, had proven very useful in him securing uh, influential speakers to precede his speech each and every Sunday at the Audubon. However, it's interesting that on this day, we're going to see this on several instances. On this particular day, none of his invited guests showed up. They they'd never had, according to witnesses, they'd never had this issue before. Malcolm X always had two or three speakers to precede him, warm up the crowd. And in this situation, nobody showed up. They all confirmed that they were attending, they would be there. But on the day, none of them showed up. With regards to just to set the stage, and the question that I had and the question in people's minds is always, did Malcolm X know? I think it's sort of far-fetched to think that he didn't know that his life was in danger. We've just gone through four attempts on his life. One attempt to prevent him from traveling. And he has, according to witnesses, already said to people in the car when he returned that his problems would come from Washington, not Chicago. At least, acknowledging the fact that he's got problems in Washington in addition to Chicago. He's said many times to witnesses that he knew he wasn't going to live long. He was a, quote, dead man walking. And he has expressed concern for his family. Since I don't have a life insurance policy, how are they going to live after I'm gone? As if he is already gone. And then they had the bombing at his house and things. So anyway, he's quite aware. According to Muriel Feelings, it was quite obvious that his life was in danger or jeopardy. He was a human being. He tried to do as much as he could. And there was also the pressures and concerns about his wife and children, about what he had to leave them. We talked about that. They had stripped him, when they expelled him from the nation, they tried to strip him of everything. They evicted him from the house. We didn't leave, they bombed it. They've cut off his income, taken his car. Now someone is preventing him from traveling. And everywhere he looks, there's threats. And not just on him, but now on his family as well. This is a picture of Muriel Feelings. She was close to Malcolm X. Rodnell Collins, who was Malcolm X's nephew, said he had a purpose. I admire him and Dr. King because here's two men in history who had an impact, whatever way you want to look at it. These men knew, but they did not run. Herman Ferguson of the OAAU said we were concerned about Malcolm's apparent lack of concern about his own personal safety. It's really dependent upon how you look at it. I think I've mentioned before what happened to his parents and how they were just they refused to bow the knee and they paid a price for it. That's his stock. That's where he comes from. So even though he's had a second conversion, and even though he is into unity and brotherhood and love and forgiveness and all the things now, it doesn't change the fact that at his core, he still has an iron will inherited from his mom and his dad, a stubbornness. Uh, and it's not that he's being careless with other people's lives. It is his own. And he has sort of made a peace with the fact that he has so many enemies everywhere he turns, he's probably not going to make it. But like Rodnell Collins says, he didn't run. He didn't shrink back. A lot of people thought after he was kicked out of the Nation of Islam, he'd never hear from Malcolm X again. Malcolm X's platform came from the Nation of Islam, and that was true originally. But in the aftermath, he made his own platform, and by going around the world and by learning that the civil rights movement was more of a human rights issue, and it affected more than Detroit and Philadelphia. It affected the entire world. And forming that coalition, he became bigger after the Nation of Islam than he was during his days in the Nation of Islam. He didn't run. He was out there each and every day. They did a pretty good job in that in that TV series, story of Bumpy Johnson, Mafia Godfather. Bumpy and him have several arguments. Bumpy's trying to provide him with security, and the security's getting in Malcolm X's way. I mean, up to and including being in his own house, right? And on that fateful day, February 21st, 1965, the way it's portrayed in the TV series, uh, Malcolm X succeeds in kicking out all the security from Bumpy Johnson because though he was thankful for Bumpy Johnson's intent, the whole thing, he said, "Listen, I got to live, man. I can't hide. Uh, I can't operate like this." So this was a dispute that he had within his own organization, even up to and including this very day. You'll see here in a second. Before the meeting, they had a discussion amongst themselves. And of course, Malcolm X was there. According to Sheikh Omar, Malcolm listened very carefully to everything that we said. It was all about security. When the discussion was over, Malcolm said, quote, "No one is to be searched." Even after his house had been bombed a week earlier, February 14th, he said, "No one is to be searched." This is the day he was assassinated. He's, and of course, knowing how he was assassinated, a simple search of everybody who came into that meeting room would have prevented the assassination attempt, or at least the shots from the shotgun man. There was no way he could carry a shotgun or sneak a shotgun under his trench coat into the Audubon Ballroom if they're searching everybody at the door. But Malcolm X said no one was to be searched, according to Sheikh Omar. Peter Bailey said he was trying to get away from this image when asked, well, why would he say don't search? He was trying to get away from this image that the Nation of Islam, when he came to a meeting, everybody was searched before they went in. He was trying to get away from that image because he was trying to attract people to his new organization. In hindsight, the organization should have said to him, wait a minute, as the leader of the organization, you have no right to say that. The President of the United States does not determine his own security, but that's how it happened. Sheikh Omar continued later saying, Malcolm would oftentimes say, I'm a walking dead man. He had a premonition he was not going to live the year out, that he was going to die. I do not understand why he did not allow us to search, but as I mentioned, that was a mistake. Here you see another quote, Malcolm X directly. I don't worry. I'm a man who believed that I died 20 years ago, and I live like a man who is dead already. It's that dead man walking. Okay, so that's the pretext to the meeting. He's already been warned by Che Guevara. You don't have good security. His OAAU membership leadership has told him we've got to increase security. And he has told them, no, I don't want to be searched. I don't want anybody searched at the door. And this is a regular meeting. It happens every Sunday. So if you are someone looking for an opportunity to take a shot at Malcolm X, you know where you'll see him, at least on Sundays. And now you're being advised that the meeting hall, there's not going to be people at the door searching you like they are with the Nation of Islam. And so, as far as the opportunity is concerned, it's wide open. But it's even more wide open when you consider the story of Gene Roberts. I've got a picture here. You see Malcolm X. This is him speaking seconds before the shots rang out in the Audubon Ballroom. And you see Gene Roberts is right up front facing the crowd. He is one of Malcolm X's bodyguards. And I want to focus my attention on him for the balance of this episode. So he's one of the bodyguards who stood in front of the stage. His job was to look out into the crowd and watch for any hanky-panky going on in the crowd. And in the aftermath of the assassination, of course, he had a lot to say. He was interviewed. He said, quote, I noted, and in subsequent years as well. He said, quote, I noticed three people sitting in the front row reading newspapers. Now, this is before the Malcolm X came out. This is before the event actually began. So he's scanning the crowd as they're filing in. He said, I didn't mention it because they were there before I got there, and I figured they had already been checked out. False assumption. Just as Malcolm was being introduced, two individuals started a commotion. Here comes the diversion. And I started walking towards them. The next thing I know, I see these guys firing shots. I went straight to the stage, felt Malcolm's pulse. He still had one, but it was weak. I started to give him mouth to mouth. After about 5 minutes, not wanting to tell Betty that he was dead, I told Betty that I was getting dizzy. Maybe somebody else could try. At that point, she got on her knees next to him, but it was too late. Then I left. All right, let's work our way through this and find out who this Gene Roberts really is. So when he got home, he called his supervisor, told him that Malcolm was shot. Now, what Malcolm knew and what the OAAU knew was that he was a bodyguard for them. But he revealed that after he got home, he called his supervisors. The question is, who's your supervisor? You work for us. According to Roberts, he was, quote, ordered into the offices the next morning, which was the Bureau of Special Services. In other words, his supervisor was with Bossie. Now, I have indicated already what Bossie was. Bossie is the Bureau of Special Services, trained by the FBI. It was, in the case of Malcolm X, it was the uh, organization that was surveilling him. And it was a division of the NYPD, but it was trained by the FBI, and it worked. It collaborated with the FBI on it, and Roberts was in Bossie. Jerry left court. A defense attorney said it's true. Gene Roberts was one of those operatives working for the NYPD and the Bureau of Special Services who was put into various black groups. In other words, he's an infiltrator. He has, in his case especially, because he himself is black, he becomes a valuable informant. Or in their case, he's not actually an informant because he's not a civilian informing to the FBI or to the NYPD. He's actually one of them. He's an infiltrator. He infiltrated Malcolm X's security detail so successfully that Malcolm X and the OAAU thought he was working for them. But here, in his own words, he is saying, no, I was working for Bossie. And as soon as I got home, I called my supervisor, reported in, and they ordered me to come into the office the next morning. Abdurrahman Muhammad said, if there's any doubt whether the NYPD really cared about the fate of Malcolm X and his family, the story of Gene Roberts puts it to rest. Roberts was an undercover police officer. He belonged to a very secretive unit within the NYPD. He had managed to infiltrate Malcolm X's organization, and he rose to the position of personal bodyguard and security for Malcolm X. All right, so here you see him. This picture should have extra meaning now that you know who he is. Here he is, close enough to Malcolm X that he can, subsequent to the shooting, give him mouth to mouth. And he is not working for the OAAU. He is not loyal to Malcolm X. He is loyal to the NYPD and Bossie, which all work for the FBI. He is infiltrated. So this is a picture of him years later giving an interview. And of course, he being a black man, he carried some guilt going forward because he was involved in the assassination of another black man. And so he said, never done anything of this nature before, but at that time I had a pregnant wife, and hey, it's a job. Let's go out and do it. With respect to his success at infiltration, he said, quote, nobody knew me except a particular little group, which was the Bureau of Special Services. Uh, Subsequent, by the way, to Malcolm X's assassination and Robert's role in that, he went on later to infiltrate the Black Panthers for Bossie as well. So he was good at his job. And Tony Bauza, who was an NYPD detective, worked with Bossie as well. When he was asked about it, said, quote, we wanted someone to infiltrate Malcolm's new organization, OAAU. We didn't know where Malcolm was going. We didn't know what he was going to do or whether he was going to break the law. We just figured out what we needed. Roberts was a black male with no roots in the police department, no relatives. And we said, quote, we'll induct you into the police department on January 1st, but you never get a uniform, never get a gun. You won't ever even get sworn in. Malcolm thought that the police department was monitoring him, but in a very obvious way. Guys in uniforms. I don't think he understood that his closest associate was working for us. Okay, well, all I'm trying to do here is establish the fact that uh, infiltration has taken place. Now, if you're a thinking person and you've followed my series, you know that infiltration has taken place before in these assassination plots. It's a strategy that always works. In the JFK assassination, if you remember, it was the CIA, the CIA officer who infiltrated the Dallas police, who was behind the fence, the picket fence on the grassy knoll, and fired the fatal shots, or fatal shot that killed JFK. But he was a CIA infiltrator of the Dallas Police Department. If you remember the RFK plot, again, you have a infiltrator, another CIA agent, who infiltrates RFK's security detail. This was only his second assignment since infiltration. His name is Thane Eugene Caesar, and he's the one escorting RFK through the hallway into the kitchen, the pantry area, and then eventually shot RFK behind the right ear. Shot him 4 times, 3 times making contact, and he's the one who killed him. He was a CIA infiltrator. If you remember the MLK plot, there were several infiltrations. There was a Memphis head of police and fire, Frank Holloman, who was former FBI, who infiltrated and ran the operation on behalf of his former boss, J. Edgar Hoover in Washington. He ran it from the ground in Memphis. There was the Memphis police officer who was first on the scene, who turns out was an informant for the FBI. He's the one appointed first at the flop house, getting everybody's attention going towards the flop house instead of the bushes or the firehouse. There was a preacher who was part of the entourage, whose job was, he was an FBI informant, who's suspected FBI informant, never confessed, never admitted. So alleged FBI informant who, well, his job was to get Martin Luther King out on that balcony on the way to his house to eat dinner that night. Instead of going out the back like they normally did, took him out the front. Infiltration is key in so many of these plots. They're like agent provocateurs, and they get inside and they gain the confidence of the subject, the victim, and they lead them like lambs to the slaughter. And I didn't even talk about in the JFK case how the Secret Service was infiltrated. So Here we see a tactic that's been used before. Now, what was the problem in this case for Gene Roberts and for Bossie was the fact that a life photographer caught him attending to Malcolm X in the aftermath, and people start investigating everyone who was attending to Malcolm X. You see him, I've got him pictured here, giving mouth to Malcolm X. That's Gene Roberts. This Life magazine photo emerges, and it jeopardizes everything. Nobody knew Roberts was an intelligence operative. Nobody was supposed to know he was even there. But here he is in a Life magazine collection of photos. So he goes to the meeting the next morning with his boss. And the only question they have for him is, why on earth did you give him mouth to mouth? You're not supposed to do that. Now, Roberts maintained that as a cop, quote, it was my job to possibly save lives if I could. What was I supposed to just let him lay there and die? So he was acting, in his words, as a humanitarian. Tony Bauza, who was responsible for his infiltration into this position, it was him who picked Roberts for the task and supervised him, says, why would you do that? You're a cop. He's a thug, talking about Malcolm X, and you're giving him, that's, boy, I'll tell you, what a statement from a police officer slash FBI bossy officer. I don't know what they call him, officers, whatever. To call Malcolm X, the guy you've infiltrated, the guy you're surveilling, to call him a thug. That tells you the mindset right there. Anyway, he said he's a thug, and you're giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Inappropriate. This is them. We are us. We don't do that. You're not there to be Malcolm X's friend. You're there to monitor his behavior or maybe lead to his arrest. Agent provocateur, right? They're not autonomous agents. These are spies and tools. They're not even allowed to think. They're only there to observe and report. So thinking is dangerous. In other words, Gene Roberts is in trouble for doing what he did. Now, not trouble that disqualified him from being used in the future. As we saw, he became an infiltrator into the Black Panthers next. But they're not happy, especially because that picture had been taken. So we now know that the NYPD, which has an ultra secret Bossy unit, which has been trained and works hand in hand with the FBI, has an agent. And here's the picture. This is without the shading. This is without the circle. This is without the highlight, whatever. But you can see this is the actual photo of Malcolm X bending over, speaking into the microphone. And there's Gene Roberts facing out. And he does not work for OAAU. He does not work for Malcolm X. He works for the government. And he's infiltrated the security detail. Now, I've made a big deal in past episodes with respect to JFK, RFK, and MLK about security stripping. Security stripping can be accomplished one of two ways. You can either get rid of the security by pulling them out or somehow removing them from the scene, leaving the security detail shorthanded, or you can compromise it another way by infiltrating it with your people. I think what we're going to find going forward, I've already established that it has been infiltrated, but we're also going to see that several of the loyals, the ones loyal to Malcolm X, are going to be removed in the hours before this event to prevent them from being there to protect Malcolm X. In other words, Malcolm X security stripping is going to happen both ways, infiltration and removal. We'll get to the removal story later. But so this is something that Malcolm X always said to himself before he took the stage, make it plain. I I think that's cool. I, I think that's really cool because, uh, one of the mistakes public speakers make, I think I've made it so many times, is trying to uh, sound more intelligent than you really are, trying to use words that you don't really use, trying to be somebody you're not, trying to, uh, juice it up a little bit. And Malcolm X always told himself before he took the stage to make it plain. I think it's a good lesson for people who speak to, if you're going to have a real impact on folks, just speak normal. Get up there and speak like you speak. Let it come from your heart. Let it be real. And they will identify with you and with what you're saying. Your words will have power. Your words will have meaning. And no one who ever heard Malcolm X speak would ever say that his words were shallow or empty or meaningless or lacking in power, or intensity, or passion. He was a master at keeping it plain. But he was human like the rest of us, and he had to remind himself, make it plain. So he says that. He takes the stage at approximately 3:15 p.m., and as he begins speaking, a man in the back begins shouting. He's accusing somebody sitting next to him of picking his pocket. This creates the disturbance. This is another tactic. All right, we've already talked about infiltration, and we've already talked about security stripping. We're just introducing these things in this episode. That's all we're doing. We'll get into the nuts and stuff, nuts and details later. But we've introduced infiltration, we've introduced security stripping, and now let's introduce another tactic that's commonly used, and that's diversion or disturbance. Just as a quick matter of review, in the JFK case, the diversion was the Texas School Book Depository. The kill shot came from the grassy knoll. In the MLK case, the diversion was Sirhan. Everybody's watching him while Thane Eugene Caesar executes RFK from behind. In the MLK case, the diversion was the flop house or the rooming house, which we find out later everyone was pointing in that direction because the FBI informant who arrived on the scene first pointed in that direction, and everyone followed suit. So these diversions sometimes are created by disturbances, sometimes they're created by people pointing in a direction, sometimes, whatever. You can accomplish diversion in any number of ways. In this case, it's this guy in this confrontation with this alleged pickpocket, which we're going to find out later. There were 5 people involved in this plot as far as active participants on that day. And person number one and person number one started the confrontation with the pickpocket. Person number two was the guy who steps out and throws a smoke bomb into the area. Now everyone's looking at the altercation, then they're looking at the smoke. They're all turned around looking towards the back of the auditorium. Meanwhile, the shooters step forward and are in point blank range right in front of Malcolm X. Malcolm X steps out from behind the podium, leans down to speak directly into the mic, saying, "Cool it, brothers and sisters." He's referring to what's going on in the back. Meanwhile, the shooters walk right up to him as he's bent over. This is seconds before the shooting, this photo, and unload their guns into Malcolm X's body. Amidst the confusion, a quote, this is Abdurrahim Muhammad says, a burly, dark-skinned man walked up to the stage and pulled from under his coat a sawed-off shotgun and fired at Brother Malcolm at point-blank range. Next thing I know, 2 other fellows jumped up and started shooting the place up. The 3 gunmen total fired 21 shots. They hit Malcolm 17 times. And when the shooting stopped, According to witnesses, Malcolm never didn't fall until the shooting stopped. You'd think taking 17 shots he would have fell, but he didn't. It was almost like he was held erect by some mysterious force that provided an easy target for the shooters. After the shooting stopped, he fell and he hit his head violently on the wooden stage floor, the back of his head. And of course, he bled out right there on the stage and he died. He was 39 years old when this happened. You see in that picture right there is another one of those life photographs. And you look at the podium and you can see circles. Those are bullet holes. They were shooting through the podium at him, but they've ripped open his shirt. Look, the shotgun blast is what killed him. We'll get into that later. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but right in the chest, right around the heart. So that's enough for today. That's the actual event. I want to save the what happens next, the aftermath, the investigation, etc. That's where we're headed next, and that's where we're going to start to see more patterns emerge that are suspiciously similar to patterns we've seen previous in the assassination of JFK. Of course, at this time, that's been the primary assassination, right? Uh, JFK killed 63. Now, of course, Fred Hampton was killed earlier than that, but it's not until 68 when MLK and RFK are killed and people start putting all these together that you start recognizing patterns. When it's just one or two, it's not enough to see a pattern that is consistent or series of patterns that are consistent from assassination to assassination. What we're looking at now is because we have the benefit of history and hindsight. We're looking back at all four of them in context and saying, well, they haven't happened yet in real time, the two in 68, but the one in 63 and now this one in 65, here we are in 2025. We can pull in what happened in 68, those two, and now we can examine all four of them for similarities. And that's what we're going to be doing. And you're going to see some amazing similarities, whereby when you start to unveil one of them and learn that it couldn't have happened when the government said, it starts to make you question the other three because it's the same entities making the same claims about all of them. That once you discredit even one of them, it serves it serves to discredit the other three. So that's why I wanted to do this study on the heels of JFK, RFK, MLK. I also want to look at Malcolm X because I think they're all part of the same pattern involving the same entities, the same strategies and tactics. And of course, we're going to look at what united the four victims and made them threats that had to be assassinated. So that's where we're going from here. We've all the backstory is there, and now we know what happened on February 21st. We know there's been infiltration. Okay, from Gene Roberts' own mouth, from Tony Bowser's own mouth, we know there's infiltration. So that's partly how they created a security stripping situation. But we're going to learn that there's another way that they created a security stripping situation as well. And they created diversion, a distraction. And so that's enough to get us started. So that's episode 8. And I hope you enjoyed that. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.